I think you're on mute, Jamie.
How about now?
Good to
Okay.
go.
Oh, well, it's morning here in New York. So good morning, good evening, good afternoon. Everyone, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate you taking your time to spend it with us here today to talk about FSharp. And I am joined with my good friend and colleague, Luis.
Hey, folks. Happy to be here. Happy to have you join us, and I'm super excited to get started learning FSharp.
All right. So our agenda for today is going to be, we're going to go through the fundamentals of what you need, kind of the prerequisites. And then we're going to get into the workshop where we'll walk through like what you need and how to get downloaded and how to get started. And then we'll take some time for some questions. And then we'll also get into a second workshop for a Learn module where we'll actually be like taking our first steps with FSharp. Is that right?
Yeah, I think that sounds about right. So we'll get into some of the introduction. I know we have about 2 hours here, so we'll definitely take our time, take it slow, and make sure that folks are able to follow along. And of course, as you mentioned, right, these are Learn modules. So if folks, want to continue their learning, they can just continue the learning path, right, and they can continue their FSharp learning journey there.
Yeah, absolutely. Everything that we're doing here today is we'll be walking through the Microsoft Learn modules that are published live. You can get all the resources for that and more at aka.ms/FSharp, spelled out F. Thank you very much. Sharp_resources, where you can also find the links to the workshops here and tons of documentation, videos, lots of gold in there.
Totally.
Yeah. All right. So why don't we get started, Luis? You ready?
Let's do it. Yeah, let's do it.
Okay.
All right. So let's see here. So we're going to start off by basically, as you mentioned, Jamie, this is the place where you can get all these resources, right? So that's this URL link. And essentially, we're just going to be covering FSharp. So if you're not familiar with what FSharp is, it's essentially it's a programming language, first and foremost, right? And it works in the .NET platform, and it's this way of writing succinct code. It allows you to write robust code, right? It has a really lightweight syntax. It lets you write robust code in the sense that it's backed by the .NET runtime. And at the same time, you're also able to write performing code because things like parallelism, concurrency are sort of built into the language, right? So that's really, really nice. And you're also able to write performing code as well, right? So because, as I mentioned this as well, it's backed by the .NET runtime, you get that sort of you sort of get that performance for free just by being in the .NET ecosystem. Now, we're not really going to talk about .NET in this session, right? That's beyond the scope of it. But actually, there are a lot of great resources out there. There's a lot of videos. There's a lot of learn paths that you can take for learning what .NET is, right? Because this is really, really excellent ecosystem with tooling, languages, including FSharp, that you can really take advantage of to really build applications for any platform. So definitely recommend you checking it out. And the last part about FSharp, right, is that it's really practical. I think I've seen some folks sort of mention functional programming, and they mentioned Haskell and Elixir and all these other functional programming languages that people tend to associate with, like, I need to know all this math and I need to know all these things ahead of time. I need to know what a monad is. I'll be honest, I have no idea what a monad is, and I won't even try to begin to explain that to you, right? But FSharp is really practical in the sense that it helps you be productive, and it just wants you to it wants to help you get things done, right? So if you were maybe worried a little bit that maybe I shouldn't join these folks here on the chat because I don't know what functional programming is, or I haven't had the best experience with other programming languages that are functional, right? Don't worry about that, because FSharp is not really that. And while you can do a lot of those things, you don't necessarily have to, right? Off the bat, you can just start writing succinct, simple code without having to worry about all these complexities that a lot of times you might not even need in your applications.
Excellent. So for today, this is a good place to get started if you're unfamiliar.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep.
Excellent.
Cool.
All righty. So what do we need to get started? Do we need any installations? Like, where should we go first?
We do. Yeah, we do. So the first thing, and actually the only thing that you actually need is the .NET SDK. So let me actually go to the module here. So write your first code. You can find this on Learn here. And the name of this module is called Write Your First F# Code, right? And something that you're going to need to have a little bit of familiarity with are just be comfortable in the command line, right? And the Microsoft Docs, specifically as it pertains to working with the .NET CLI, which we're going to get to in a little bit later. They have really great documentation in the sense that you don't actually have to type out a lot of these commands. You can literally copy and paste it from the documentation, and for the most part, it will work. But at the same time, if you do run into issues, right, you need to have some familiarity to be able to at least troubleshoot a little bit. But very rarely does that happen. And the other thing that you're going to sort of need here is some introductory knowledge of programming concepts. So things like maybe functions and things like that. At a high level, right? Like you don't need to know exactly, the details, but just have some, rudimentary knowledge of what these things are, because we mentioned them and we don't go too deep into them in any of these modules, or at least not this first module, but just have a general understanding of it definitely helps. All right. So again, if we get started with this module here, go ahead and start. And in this module, what we're going to do is we're going to do two things. Number one is we're going to get our environment ready. The second thing we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and write our first line of FSharp code using FSharp Interactive, which is, you're going to see it here in a minute, but it's this really cool way of basically evaluating code in real time with FSharp. So it's a really nice feature for prototyping. And then the last part is just going to be building our first console application, right? And we're going to have the .NET CLI sort of help us with all those things. So as I mentioned, FSharp is an open source cross-platform programming language, and it helps you write, it's very lightweight syntax, helps you write succinct code. It's performant, it's robust, and it's practical. And what I mentioned earlier as well, right, was the fact that you can write any type of application, and this is true, right? So with FSharp, you can write web applications, so web APIs for the backend. Maybe if you're talking to some database, you can write really nice and elegant UIs. All right, single page applications, WebAssembly is sort of the hotness. I think folks, last month, I think you had an event here, Jamie, where I think you had Jeff Fritz talk about Blazor, right? So that's WebAssembly, and it's sort of, a lot of folks, it's becoming really popular within the web development community. So you can do things like that with FSharp as well, with libraries like Bolero, right? You can also write desktop applications. You can do mobile applications with the Xamarin sort of set of tools, right? You can also do big data and data science and machine learning with things like .NET for Spark and ML.NET. You can do IoT, right? And you can also even do gaming. So really any type of application that you really can think of, right? You can essentially build it with FSharp. And actually yesterday there was this really cool event, right? Because here we're not really going to get into all the details of how you would go about building these applications. But if you do want to see some real world examples of how folks are using FSharp to build real world applications, yesterday we had things like IoT, machine learning, biology, right? Doing sort of DNA sequencing. So all types of applications. You can check out the .NET Conf Focus on FSharp event, which actually the recording is live now, but it took place yesterday. So make sure to check that out to get a better idea of how you would go about using FSharp to build those types of applications. So that's really cool, right? It's this really, really nice way of working cross-platform, and not only cross-platform, but also across different targets, depending on what it is that I want to build. Right? And as I mentioned, right, by the end of this, we're going to essentially just write our first line of FSharp code, and we're going to build our first console application. So with that, let's get started. So in next unit here, we're just basically going to be going over what is FSharp. So again, just reiterating, if you haven't heard that enough, it's a way of writing succinct, performant, robust, and practical code, right? And in this case, we're going to get a little bit more into the details as to what that means. So if we talk about succinctness, right, you're writing less code, and writing less code it's not necessarily a goal, right? Like sometimes, maybe sometimes you'll hear like, oh, my performance is measured by the lines of codes that I write, which isn't always the best, measure of performance. But writing less code for the sake of writing less code doesn't always mean that your code is clear. But in this case with FSharp, there's a few features inside of FSharp that just help you write less code that makes sense, and you're not just doing it for the sake of doing it and making your code look a little bit, making it more complex and hard to understand, right? FSharp lets you be expressive, but at the same time, it lets you write less code. There's features like, if you scroll down here, like type inference, right? So type inference is probably the closest that you're going to get to doing sort of having like dynamic typing dynamic typing features inside of a statically typed language. So if you're not familiar with like what static typing and dynamic typing are, basically static typing is where you have a compiler, and this compiler is basically analyzing your code, and it's sort of it's taking a look at your code, analyzing it, and it eventually turns it into language or instructions that your computer can understand, right? Whereas dynamically typed, you still kind of have a compiler, but the compiler itself isn't really checking the types of your application. So it doesn't know if like you're working with text data or whether you're working with numbers and things like that. It's checking it, but it's not being strict about it. So you can basically pass data around, and because you don't necessarily have the compiler checking those things for you, it will accept anything for the most part, right? And you're not going to run into errors in your application until you actually run it, right? That's where you're going to figure out, oh, I can't add two pieces of text together, right? I need to have two numbers. So having the compiler to help you check your types can not only help you write more robust applications, because you're going to be able to catch those errors ahead of time, but also it can help you write, in the case of FSharp, it helps you write less code because the compiler is looking at your code and it's analyzing, and it's like, I see that you're working with text in this particular part of the application. So I'm going to assume that the types that you're working with are text or they're strings, all right? And as a result of that, I don't have to explicitly tell the compiler, or tell inside of my application, or write in my code explicitly, this is a type that I'm working with, because the compiler is basically doing that for me already. So it makes it super easy to again write less code, but at the same time be safe inside of a statically typed language like FSharp, which FSharp is. And again, it's as a result of that, you don't necessarily FSharp is it's sort of white space sensitive in the sense that there's not a lot of curly braces or special characters to sort of try to define scope. And in many cases, once you start getting into the code, you're going to see that it basically just it reads like if it was pseudocode for the most part, right? Meaning that if you were to take a piece of paper and write things down, like, okay, this is in general how my application is supposed to work, that's kind of FSharp reads, right? So if you work with Python before, in a lot of respects, it kind of looks that way, right? So if you're a big fan of that style of programming where it's like succinct, then at the same time, it's very easy to read and very easy to write. You'll definitely like FSharp for those particular features. Let's see.
It sounds really efficient.
It is. I myself am lazy, so I don't. If I can write less code, then that's a win for me. So, well. And again, right, like I go back to that where it's like, I don't want to write less code for the sake of writing less code. Because if I write less code, or I guess if you write less code, there's less bugs, right? Like if you write no code, you're going to have no bugs in your applications. But like, I don't want to write less code for the sake of writing less code. I want to write less code for that, in part for that, right? Like I want to limit the amount of bugs that I'm going to introduce in my application and the complexity of my application. But at the same time, I want to know that I'm being safe, right? And FSharp really lets you do that, where you're writing less code, but at the same time, you're not sort of bypassing some of those safety checks, and making sure that you're actually working with the right types in your application and that your logic actually makes sense. So it's really nice to sort of have that happen. Okay, let's see. So that's succinct. Performant, again, parallelism, concurrency is sort of built in. We're not really going to get into asynchronous expressions here, but it's safe to say that those are things that are built into the language. And the really nice thing with FSharp, I'll just kind of mention here, is that you have to like in FSharp, you're able to sort of organize how you want your code to execute, right? So it's as simple as saying, I want my asynchronous operations to perform basically in parallel, right? So sort of like simultaneously at the same time, or if I want them to perform sequentially. So, for example, let's say that you're sending messages and you need those messages to be in order, right? So you can schedule things to perform in a sequential fashion, right? And those things are as simple as a simple, like it's just a function that you're telling it, hey, this is how I want my program to run, and then it sort of takes care of doing that for you in the background. Right. So it's really nice having those features built in, because actually writing concurrent code and asynchronous code is actually really hard. So if FSharp can just give me that for free, and it's like as simple as a few function calls here and there, I'm all for that, right? And it goes back to that sort of succinctness, right? If I myself am not writing the code to actually handle all this concurrency and parallelism, then not only am I safer, because that's code that I'm not writing, that's less bugs that I may potentially introduce, but also it just ends up being easier for me to think about if I just need to write this single line of code. And I'll sort of backtrack here. So I mentioned asynchronous. If you don't know what asynchronous is, it's kind of difficult to explain, but I'll try to give you an example. So the example here would be synchronous. The synchronous example would be, let's say that I was to send you a message, and like I sent you an email, and I literally just sat here in front of my desk and I waited for your response. And you could probably like respond right away, or you might respond like 5 days later, right? But I did absolutely nothing but sit at this desk waiting for your response. So that's what's called synchronous, right? So in the context of a program or in the context of application, that means that you start an operation and you do absolutely nothing else on your computer but perform that operation. Whereas asynchronous is if I sent you that message, sent you an email or whatever, and then I just went about my day and I did other stuff. And then eventually on my phone, it pops up and it's like, hey, this person responded. I'm like, okay, cool. And then I'll go back into my email and respond to you or do whatever I need to do with that response. So with asynchronous, right, that's exactly what it means. It's just you free up the computer to go do other things as you're awaiting for that operation that you kicked off to sort of take place. So as you could imagine, right, trying to manage all those processes that are happening at the same time, it's super hard. So the fact that it's built in, it's awesome, right? And when you're able to again make efficient use of your resources, it's just that much better, right? Your application just performs better. It's actually really useful in UI applications, right? Because sometimes I don't know if you've seen in UI application, maybe a web page or a mobile app or whatever, there's stuff that's happening, right, in your application, and sometimes you'll notice that the UI freezes. And chances are it's probably because the asynchronous requests or any other operations that are taking place aren't scheduled correctly, right? So you'll notice those types of bugs pop up. So again, not to beat a dead horse here, but it's writing concurrent code and parallel code. It's extremely hard. FSharp makes it super easy for you to do so. And in the process, you also end up writing less code that actually ends up being performant as well. I did see that some questions came through here though, so I was hoping that maybe we could get to it.
Yeah, so I wanted to make sure that you got through this portion of it,
Yep.
just sort of the introduction. So it seems like we want performant, robust. What are our 4 keywords?
Oh yeah,
Distinct.
Succinct, performant, robust, and practical. Yes.
Practical code. And it's nice that it can run simultaneously as it is an async extension function.
For sure.
So we did get some questions that I'd like to get to.
Yeah.
All right. So which language is FSharp most similar to?
Good question. Honestly, I think the closest that I've seen it in terms of syntax and the way that some of the types and things like that are named, maybe OCaml, right? So it's very similar to OCaml. That's probably closest to, but it definitely does borrow the best of a lot of languages, right? So there's, we're gonna probably get into this maybe a little later. But you could also do object programming in it, right? So classes and interfaces and things like that. Those are things that are actually available in FSharp as well. So, and that's also part of the practical side of things, right? Where it supports multiple paradigms. I know folks tend to associate FSharp with this functional set of languages, but actually FSharp is a multi-paradigm. You can do functional, and it works with functional really well, but you can also do object programming. So you can have your classes and you can have your interfaces and perform object programming and even interoperate with languages like C#, which are a little bit more object programming oriented, right? So it's really practical in that sense, where you have the best of both and you don't have to choose. You just have to choose which pattern makes the most sense to solve the problem that I want to solve.
I see. So whichever works best for your project.
Yep.
Okay, so speaking of C#, Paul asks, if I have zero experience with FSharp, is it anything like C# in regards to syntax?
Some things are, but not really. The syntax is it's definitely, as I mentioned, succinct, right? And the main part there is that you have like the way that you assign, and we'll probably see this. We're going to see this in as we go through this module. A lot of it is just binding values, and values are literally all over FSharp. So that could be a function, that could be a string, that could be anything really, and everything just gets bound with the let keyword, right? So everything that you assign and is by using this let keyword. So it's basically just like with the let keyword is basically like the var equivalent in C#. So it's basically like having a bunch of vars everywhere throughout your application, which is really nice. Again, the compiler with type inference sort of resolves the types for you, so you don't necessarily need to worry about using types. So in some regards, it's similar, but it is somewhat different, I would say, or significantly different enough that a lot, there's definitely minimal use of curly braces to define scope. It's white space delimited or white space sensitive. So it's different enough that you might have some things that are going to look different to you. But again, because the syntax is so lightweight, there's not a lot for you to sort of pick up on, right? To say like, oh, I can't learn this because there's all these operators or there's all these, characters and things in the syntax that I need to learn.
I see. So it's essentially there are some similarities, but there may be some IntelliSense needed to kind of create the function that you need.
Correct. Yes.
Okay. So does FSharp have threads or threading?
It does. Yep.
It does.
It does.
Okay. So we have a few more questions here, and we'll take questions for a few more minutes too. So feel free to submit them now.
Yep.
So Michael from YouTube asks, well, first, there are two parts to this question.
Yes.
One, what are discriminated unions? And the second part is if discriminated unions will come to C#.
Good question. So the first question, discriminated unions it's beyond the scope of this, but just as a quick, high level overview of what it is, it's just like a way to represent hierarchies. It's a type to represent object hierarchies. So, good example is like contact methods, right? If you have, you might have different contact methods to contact somebody. So those contact methods could be, your contact method could be the name of your discriminated union. And then the different types of contact methods will be like the sort of the keys or the labels for each of those contact methods. So you might have postal mail, phone number, SMS, right? And so it's just a way to represent those hierarchies of objects. And they're super powerful and extremely powerful and useful inside of FSharp. And it can, again, contribute to that sickness in expressing sort of domain logic inside of your applications. Is it coming to C#? I actually have no idea. But there is a community stand-up which takes place around languages and runtime. So I would say that that would be a good question to ask on there. So definitely make sure to check out I believe that's what it's called, the Languages and Runtime Community Stand-Up.
Yes, there is a
Yes.
language and runtime community stand-up.
Yep.
We have lots of community stand-ups actually that cover all of our product tooling under .NET. So feel free to check those out.
Absolutely.
Um, they are recorded. Um, so we'll take a couple more questions. Can you list some companies using FSharp, or is there job opportunities in FSharp?
Absolutely. And I would encourage you to check out the very first session that Don had, the FSharp Bonanza, which had all of these companies, large, small, anywhere from startups all the way to, Walmart and these larger companies, right? So the list of opportunities is endless, right? And all types of companies sort of use FSharp. So I would encourage you to check out that session. And like I said, it's literally the first one. So, it's not like you had to scrub through the video and like 4 hours later you find it. It's literally the first one. So make sure to check that
Yeah,
out.
this is the first session of the .NET Conf Focus FSharp event that happened yesterday. Don Syme kind of opened it up with a keynote, and he mentions tons and tons of customer success stories with FSharp. That was the one Luis was referring to.
Yes.
Yeah, and what about some like job opportunities? It's kind of like a up and coming language right now.
Yeah, and I think I believe he was the I forget if it was an engineering manager, but it was the manager within Walmart talking about how, so they're using FSharp, right? But then I think the question was like, oh well, do I need to know FSharp, or were the people that you've hired FSharp developers? And actually, it was an interesting response to that question, which was like, no, a lot of folks were just, they thought the language was cool. They were open and willing to learn. And we just, brought them onto the team and sort of, we kind of trained them on the job a little bit. But just because it doesn't say that it's, I'm going to say this, like, just because you don't know FSharp or that you might not think that you might qualify for these sort of roles, like, like the opportunities are out there. And there's actually tons of them. And even if you don't know FSharp, typically those FSharp shops are willing to train you. So it's one of those things where like, yes, the opportunities are there, and it's okay if you're not, an expert in FSharp. Those companies are willing to sort of provide you with guidance and training and sort of help you learn the ropes.
Amazing. So this is a good place to start if you're interested.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so to keep on schedule, let's keep moving along and get started with our first workshop.
Let's do it.
Yay.
All right. Yes. So let's go ahead and set up our development environment here. So
yes. So
let's see.
Yes, our first workshop will be Luis's Learn module that he just published live last week, I believe, right? This is brand new.
Brand new, hot off the build system, I guess. Yeah.
Can we see a link to that actually?
You
perhaps?
can. Yeah. So it's in the modules FSharp First Steps. So that's the moniker there. But yeah, and it's part of Learn.
Okay, great.
So in this case, we're going to be essentially getting started with setting up our environment. So FSharp works, again, it's cross-platform, right? So whether you have Windows, Mac, or Linux, it doesn't matter. You can run it on there. So that's really great, right? That you don't have to choose. And you really have access to this really great set of tools that you can use with FSharp. So of course, you have things like Visual Studio if you're looking for that full IDE experience, right? And I'll just highlight that Visual Studio, especially the Community Edition, right? It's free, so it's a super powerful tooling with great support for FSharp. That's totally free. Again, because you're just going to be editing source code. Maybe you don't need that much. You don't need a debugger. You don't need a lot of things, right? You just need to be able to write some code. Now, in those cases, you might want to use something, a text editor, right? So you can use any text editor. I mean, you can even use Notepad that's your choice, right? The editing experience might not be great, but you can literally use Notepad just to write your programs. But when you use things like Visual Studio Code as your text editor, right, you get a lot of really nice things out of the box. So you get this IDE-like experience, but in a much more lightweight package. And not only lightweight, but it's also cross-platform, right? So for example, if you're using Visual Studio, the IDE, you have the option of Mac and Windows. But what if you're on Linux? Well, if you're on Linux, Visual Studio Code makes a lot of sense. Audacious Fair is there. Visual Studio is not available for Linux, but Visual Studio Code is. So that might be a really good choice for you. And with Visual Studio Code, the really nice thing is you're able to pair it with extensions, right? So you have the bare minimum, and the bare minimum is actually a lot, right? Like you get things like Git integration for your version control, and a whole bunch of really useful features that you might need as part of your developer workflow. To be able to track changes in your code and to debug your code and all sorts of stuff. But then you're able to take it a step further, and you're able to use extensions to, as the name sort of implies, extend the functionality of this code editor. So in this particular module, we're going to be going through Visual Studio Code mainly because it offers, again, that cross-platform experience, and you can really run it anywhere. So in terms of tooling, that's kind of where it is. But at the bare minimum, if you don't want anything, if you just want the absolute bare minimum, the only thing you need is the .NET SDK. So if you're not familiar with what the .NET SDK is, it's essentially this package suite of tools and libraries that allow you to build .NET applications. Now we're talking about FSharp, so why .NET? And as I mentioned earlier, FSharp is in a .NET language, right? Or works with .NET. So that's why we use the .NET SDK here. As part of this set of libraries and tools that are included in the .NET SDK, you have things like the .NET CLI, right? And the .NET CLI we're going to be using later, but it allows you to do a lot of things. It's just a way of interacting with the .NET driver, right? Which you see at the bottom here, right? And this .NET driver has functionality, whether it's either executing certain commands or running applications, .NET applications. And the .NET CLI is just sort of this tool that helps you use this .NET driver to perform actions like building your application or running your application, right? Packaging it, all sorts of stuff. And then the last piece here is sort of this .NET libraries and runtime, which is the base set of libraries that define the types and all the things that you're going to need to basically write .NET applications, right? So that's essentially what the .NET SDK brings, and that's what you're going to be using to essentially, to develop FSharp applications. Again, as I mentioned, you have Visual Studio Code, and with it, you have things like debugging, version control. You have an integrated terminal, right? So you do everything. Not only are you developing your code, but you're also maybe running your application inside of the integrated terminal. And the extensions, specifically the Ionide extension for FSharp, really take your FSharp development workflow to the next level by providing things like IntelliSense, error highlighting, and as we're going to see later, this scripting support. So with that, let's check out how you go about setting up your development environment. So the first thing you're going to do is you're going to want to download and install the .NET SDK. So you go ahead and click on here. And this is going to bring you to the download page for the .NET SDK. Now, there's going to be different versions. So currently, the latest stable version is .NET 5. So, however, you'll notice that there's .NET 6 here. And this is going to be, I believe, in November, right? That's when it's going to be releasing. So .NET 6 is the next long-term support version of .NET, right? So if you would like to get the latest bits, you can definitely check out .NET 6. But for now, we're going to do the current stable version, which is .NET 5. So if we go ahead and select that, it's going to bring us to this .NET 5 download page. And you're going to see that you're going to have different options. So again, because this is cross-platform, and again, I'll also mention that just like Visual Studio Code, just like the Ionide extension, just like Visual Studio Community Edition, the SDK is free as well. So you can get this, at no cost. You can just get started building applications for absolutely nothing, right? Or for free. And it's cross-platform as well. So you have Linux, you have Mac OS, and you have Windows. So choice is yours in terms of where you want to run this. I am on a Windows PC, so what I'm going to be running is on a Windows environment. So I'm going to want to select one of these installers here. And you'll also notice that there's ARM support as well. So if you are running that sweet ARM processor, you can also run .NET applications on ARM devices. So that's an option as well. Okay, so let's do x64 because that's what I have. And it's just going to start downloading. You're going to see that after a few seconds here, it's going to prompt me to go ahead and install that. Now, essentially what's going to happen at this point is it's going to download the installer. And okay. Eventually, once this finishes, you're going to want to go ahead and... It is. I'm actually I'm hooked up to the Ethernet connection, so it is going pretty fast. Yeah. Okay, so then you're going to go ahead and want to open this whenever it's done. And essentially what this is going to do is it's going to take you through some wizard. I'm not really going to go through it, mainly because it really is just setting up this application, right? Setting up the SDK. One of the other really cool things is, as I mentioned earlier, you have multiple versions of the .NET SDK. So you have, you have different versions of .NET. So you have version 5, which is current stable. But what if you wanted to have the stable version, but you also wanted to try out the latest bits? You actually could install multiple versions of the .NET SDK simultaneously. I'm not going to show you what that looks like. So here's my PowerShell here to kind of show you. So in this case, I already have the .NET SDK installed. And the way that you can tell that the .NET SDK is installed, and you're going to see this in the instructions here as well, right, is once you go through that wizard and basically install the .NET SDK, you can go ahead and open up your terminal and use the .NET CLI. So the .NET CLI, it's usually start with the .NET command. And in this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say -- version to get the version of the .NET SDK that I have installed. So in this case, I have version 5.0.302, which is the version that you just saw on there. However, you have multiple versions, .NET --list SDKs. And you're going to see that not only do I have version 5.302, I also have version 205. I have version 3.1, which is the last stable version, or long-term support, I mean, as well as 2.1, which was the long-term support before 3.1. And so you can see here that you can have them simultaneously installed. So if I wanted to install 6.0 to try out some of the latest bits, I could do that as well. And, it wouldn't conflict with how I build my applications, right? So you certainly have that option. But in this case, we're going to be working with 5.0. And you're going to notice that I just started typing commands because I type these commands often. Do you have to remember or memorize these commands? Not at all. You can just say .NET -H, I believe. There we go. So if you do .NET -H, or I believe if you only do .NET, but .NET will bring you sort of this help or give you the list of options of things that you can type in. And then let me just zoom in just a little bit, make it easier to read. If you do .NET -H here, all right, you get the help command. So these are all the different SDK commands. So you can add packages, you can build your applications, you can publish your applications, pack them. You can even use these templates, which you're going to be using later on, to scaffold applications. So you don't have to start your applications from scratch. You can just go ahead and essentially create a brand new project, .NET project, just by using this .NET new command and leverage those templates that are available to you, right? So the .NET CLI is super helpful there in helping you do all these things and letting you perform your development workflow and manage your application lifecycle from, like I said, from starting up and scaffolding an application all the way to packaging and publishing your application. So now that we checked that we downloaded, installed, and that we have the .NET SDK in our system, the next thing we're going to want to do is we're going to want to go ahead and install the Visual Studio Code and IonizedSharp extension. So to do that, we go to the Visual Studio Code download page. And in this case, you're going to see that just like the .NET SDK, you have Windows, Linux, and Mac, which are supported, and you also have ARM. So you want to run this, well, in this case in Windows, right? You have those ARM devices. But on Linux, if you want to run this on a Raspberry Pi, you absolutely can. Actually, you know, so I'm not sure how many folks are familiar with the Pine, like the Pine 64 ecosystem, but there's this sort of collective that's trying to build devices try to build mobile phones and like these ARM-based sort of computing devices, so like laptops and phones, right? And they're running on ARM. So I've actually gotten Visual Studio Code running on a Linux phone that is on an ARM chipset. So it's super extensible. Do I recommend you doing that? Probably not. But the fact that you can is actually pretty cool. Or I think it's cool. Anywho, okay, so you're going to want to go ahead and download the installer here. In this case, I'm using Windows. So you go ahead and click on that. And that's going to, like the .NET SDK, go ahead and bring you to the download the installer. You're going to, once it downloads, you're going to open that and go through the same steps of getting your software installed, right? Once you have Visual Studio Code installed, which I already do, let me actually go to, try to open up VS Code here. So once you have Visual Studio Code installed, then the next thing that we're going to want to do is, let's see, set up your FSharp development environment. Once you have Visual Studio Code installed, the next thing we're going to want to do is install this IonizedSharp extension. As I mentioned, right, the IonizedSharp extension, what it provides you with is extended functionality like IntelliSense, scripting support, error analysis, all those sorts of really, really neat things that you would expect from an IDE, really, although this is happening inside of a text editor. So if we go here, we can go ahead and go to the extensions view here. That's this little square here, kind of like a window, almost like a Windows logo. And you want to look for ionize-FSharp. Now, in this case, it's already going to be installed on my machine, but if you were installing it for the first time, you would go ahead and see an install button here. And actually, I can uninstall it. Just kind of show you what it would look like. So you would have, if this is your first time, have the install button here, and that's how you would go about installing it. And once you have that installed, you're actually ready to start building and developing FSharp applications and writing FSharp code, which is actually the next thing that we're going to take a look at here with FSharp Interactive. So with FSharp Interactive, what it is it's basically this way of writing and evaluating code in a real-time manner. So you have what I showed you with the .NET CLI, right? You saw that you had options to essentially create a new application. You could package your application, you could publish it. But sometimes you just want to really get down and you know, if you have an idea, you just want to start prototyping and you want to get started, you know, right away. You don't really want to spend time figuring out, okay, well, how do I, you know, organize my files? Like, how do I package my application? What's the right way to go about this? I just want to get to the code and start writing code, right? I don't want to really think too much about these other things. Eventually, as I develop my application and my application becomes a little bit more robust and I refactor my application, those are things that I want to think about. But right off the bat, maybe not. Maybe I just want to get into the code and start writing code. So to do that, you can use something like FSharp Interactive. Now, to start FSharp Interactive, you actually use the .NET SDK. And to start .NET Interactive, you start this .NET FSI, use the .NET FSI command. All right, so if we go to, let me go to the integrated terminal here. So the integrated terminal, what I did was control and like the tilde sort of command here on the keyboard. You could also go to the terminal and click new terminal here. And that's going to bring up this integrated terminal here inside of Visual Studio Code. Okay. So in this case, I'm actually running WSL. So if you folks are not familiar, WSL is a Windows subsystem for Linux, which essentially lets you run Linux inside of your Windows machine. So that's the terminal that I have here. So even though I'm on a Windows PC, I'm actually using Linux through the WSL, and specifically the distribution that I'm using, I believe it's Ubuntu 20.04, whichever the latest stable version is. So let's start FSharp Interactive. So .NET, or before I do that, let me go .NET-H. And we're going to see here that there should be, let me see. There it is. So additional commands for bundle tools. You're going to see that .NET FSI is part of that. And it just basically gives you the explanation here that it starts in FSharp Interactive shell, or it can execute FSharp scripts, which we're going to take a look at in a little bit. So type that in. And what that's going to do is it's going to essentially start this REPL-like experience. So REPL stands for read, evaluate, print loop. And as the name sort of implies, this environment, what it does is it reads code that you input, it evaluates it, meaning like it runs the code, and then it prints out to the console the response of the evaluated code, right? And it does so in a loop, so it's constantly just listening. It's like, okay, what code do you want to evaluate? Let me evaluate it. Here's the response, and it does so, like I said, in a loop. So you start out in this sort of REPL environment. If you very similar to the .NET SDK, the .NET CLI, right? You can use this pound help ::, and it's going to give you all sorts of commands that you can use for working with FSharp Interactive inside of this REPL environment. Right? Really cool here. You can actually load packages directly from NuGet, which is the package manager in .NET. You can just load them directly by just using this #R sort of command here. But in this case, I just want to get started. What exactly can I do? So let's go back here to the module. Again, I'm sort of explaining a little bit more what this read, evaluate, print loop is, how you can sort of evaluate expressions. The expressions are, again, evaluated. You type anything after this little greater than arrow, right? That's how you type stuff in. So again, we'll do that again, help. And you'll notice that whenever I enter a command, I add these 2 semicolons here. Now, the reason why I do that is because this REPL itself doesn't really know, like, it doesn't really know what new line characters are, right? So what new lines are. So the semicolons, what they allow you to do is that they allow you to sort of explicitly tell this environment, hey, I'm done writing my code. You can go ahead and evaluate it. So it's just an indicator of when does my expression stop, right? Like where does the end of my code stop or end? Okay, so let's write our first line of FSharp code. In this case, we're going to go and print hello world. So in this case, what's happening is you have the printfn function that takes in a string. In this case, it's going to be hello world. And it goes ahead and prints it out to the console. And you're going to see here that we have the 2 semicolons, which is basically telling it that's the end of my expression. So when we do that, we'll press enter here, you're going to see that hello world is what comes out into the console. Something else that you get after you evaluate your code is you get this it value. You get this value it. In this case, so you get the value, you get the type of that, and you get the type of that value. So in this case, the value it is of type unit. So unit is essentially like void in C#, and it's intended to represent that it's a value, but it's not something that you're going to do anything with, right? Like once I print out to the console, like there's nothing really else that I need to do with that. So that's what unit represents. It represents like there's nothing else to do with this, code or the result of this operation of printing out to the console. So I'm just going to give you a value called unit, which I'm going to give you this value, which is of type unit, which is represented by these open close parentheses, right? Now, if this were to be a value that you actually can do something with, so for example, I don't know, the number 1, you're going to see that now it is of type integer and its actual value is 1 as opposed to this unit, right? And then I can use it later on inside of my, I can continue working with the it value inside of my this REPL-like experience. So I can say it plus 2, semicolon, semicolon, and you're going to see that it's 3 because it was 1 plus 2, and now it's 3. Okay, so just pointing those things out in case you were interested what this thing here meant.
Luis,
Yes.
just a bit of clarity for those following along in the chat. For this assignment, is it preferred to use FSI or like bracket equals? What is the for this assignment? This question here.
Sorry, is it preferred to use the FSI or scripts? Or sorry, what was the question?
Can you see the question on the screen?
Oh, yeah, strange. While playing with SI equals seems then which one is best practice for assignment. Okay. Yeah, so yeah, that's a really good question. Yeah. So this equal here is basically just saying like, hey, this thing is of this type and this is the value that is being represented by this value. So we're not really assigning it. It's just basically telling us, hey, this value equals this. We're not like explicitly assigning it. By assigning meaning like let x equals I, right? So that's not exactly what we're doing here. If that makes sense. So it might look like this is what it is, but it's not. It's just basically telling us that this thing is equal to that, but we're not actually performing an assignment. Like we're not performing the assignment. It's just it's information that the FSI is giving us, but we're not explicitly doing that assignment. So
I see. Oh, do you mind zooming in on your font just a tad?
Yeah.
And then, so when would I use FSI then?
So FSI is just if you want to do like a quick and dirty sort of test out that your code runs. And actually, so here I'm just showing the REPL-like experience. You actually might not really want to do this because as you can see, right, it's not really reproducible. So if I were to say like, hey, I came up with this really cool way of like, I don't know, processing files or like, parsing files or downloading this stuff from a web page, right? And I did it all in the REPL. And then you were like, cool, yeah, I want to try it out. Can you give me the code? And I'd be like, oh, I don't have it. It's in the REPL. So I can't share that with you. So for me to try stuff out to make sure that my code is doing what I expect it to do, the REPL is a really good way to sort of work in, but it's not really recommended for sort of sharing code and for sort of versioning code, right? Because as your application changes and your code changes, you're going to want to have different versions of it, right? As your code to track it and things like that. So the REPL is one of those scenarios where you use it just to evaluate your code, but you don't necessarily want to, work directly inside of it. What you might want to do is use a script, which is kind of what I can show off here.
I see. So it's more for exploring the code and not doing full projects.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you for clarifying.
Yeah. So let me go ahead and start. Oh, I don't want to start a new window. I want to go ahead and create a file. And that's essentially what we're doing in the tutorial. If I sort of switch back here. Yep. So, oh, yeah. That's another good one that you might want to know. So once you're done working in the REPL, it's one of those things like, how do you quit Vim? You definitely want to know how to quit the REPL here. So it's that #Q followed by 2 semicolons. And that's how you quit. So now you can say that you know how to quit the REPL in FSharp, the .NET FSI REPL. So
okay, thank you.
Yes, yep. I don't want folks to sort of like get stuck there and have to leave their computer on because they don't know how to quit .NET FSI. Okay, but what I was going to show you was this thing here, these script files. So you have script files as well that you can execute with FSharp Interactive, and these script files are represented by the FSX file extension, right? And instead of, like I said, compiling your code, packaging it, and doing all sorts of, what you would typically do with a production grade application, these FSX files, you don't necessarily need to, you can just write these scripts and evaluate them interactively, without having to perform those things that you would typically do with a production grade application. So let's try out doing the exact same thing that we just did, printing out hello world to the console, but inside of a script file. So the way that you do that is you go ahead and create a new file. This is, I call it, I don't know. Whoops. Go ahead and do that again. So file, new file. And let me go ahead and select language, FSharp Interactive. Sharp Interactive. Okay. And then what I can do is print. Sorry, give me 1 second. I'm going to have to open up a new folder here. So let me go ahead and do open new folder. And what I'll do here is I'll go over to, let's see. I'll just go to development and I'll do create a new folder, learn FSharp. So in this folder, it's going to make it easier for me to sort of keep track of the files that I'm working with inside of Visual Studio Code. So once that starts up, I'm going to go ahead and create a file in this new folder called my script FSX. Go ahead and do that. My script.fsx. Okay. And inside of the script, what I'm going to want to do is I'm going to want to go ahead and create that printfn hello world. Okay. Now, one of the things that I'll note here is that notice how there are no semicolons in this case. And the reason for that is that inside of these scripts, now the standard FSharp syntax formatting starts to take place. So now it's white space sort of sensitive, and sort of the standard formatting, code formatting sort of guidelines take effect. All right. So that's why there's no semicolons here. So you can just write code like you normally would inside of any other FSharp file. All right. Now, two things. One of the things that sort of Ionide gives you is this ability to run code line by line. So let's say I were to have print fn hello and okay. So one of the really cool things that Ionide gives me is the ability to run code line by line. So let's say that I want to run first this line of code here and then this line. I can hit Alt Enter on my keyboard. Cooperate with me there. Right. But essentially what should happen at this point is the REPL is open. And there it is. It was just loading the extension still. So what's going to happen is it's going to open an FSharp Interactive session, and then it's going to send that individual line of code over to the FSharp Interactive REPL session. All right. So after a while, you should see that it sent this printfn hello world. And then if I want to run this other line of code separately, I can go ahead and do hello again. I can run them together by highlighting all the the specific code that I want to run and hit Alt Enter again. And you're going to see that both of them are sort of sent to the REPL, and my code is evaluated. So you can actually use scripts in conjunction with the REPL here to run code line by line, or you could also just run it directly. So let's say that I wanted to run this entire script. One way that I can do it from the command line is .NET FSI, and the name of my script. And you're going to see that after a while, what's going to happen is my script will be evaluated, and the output hello world and hello again will both be printed out to the console here. If you don't want to go ahead and use the command line, you can also leverage these icons up here, which do effectively the same thing. If you were to click run here, your code is run, as your script itself is run as well. So you have multiple choices here. So you can either do it through the command line, kind of like I showed, right, with using the .NET FSI to name your script, or you can use one of these icons here to run your script. And that's basically it. You just wrote your first line of FSharp code. And again, you could get started with the REPL, but I actually wouldn't recommend it for the long term. I would actually highly encourage you to start using these script files as you write your application, as you prototype. Cool.
That was awesome.
Yes.
Yay. Congratulations, everyone, for writing your first line of code. You are now an FSharp developer.
Yeah, you are now FSharp developers. You can now, yeah, you're experts. So that
You're
means that my job
experts.
here is done.
All right, let's wrap it up. No, I'm just kidding. We do have one more to get through.
We do. Yeah.
But let's take some questions because we got a bunch of questions
Yes.
for you actually.
Yes. Let's do it.
Okay, excellent. Um, yes, so all right.
It's actually, I see a question here that the keyboard, is it blue switches? No, it's not. It is red. So the sound should be dampened a little bit. So I do apologize for the keyboard noise.
Yeah, I was wondering, is there any way we can move your mic maybe away or no, your mic's kind of far.
It's pretty far as it is. But can you still hear me?
That's
As long as you can still hear me. How does that sound? Still too much?
a little better, a little better.
All right. All right.
Yeah, there was a suggestion actually that apparently a towel under your keyboard helps with the noise for future reference.
Interesting. I actually have a pad under it, so I guess that's not good enough. But okay, awesome. I'll take that into account.
Yeah, thank you for letting us know. That's definitely something we'll take into account for future events as well. So, okay, so questions. We have several. So one of them is, can FSharp and C# live inside the same project, the same solution, or do they intersect?
Ooh, good question. I don't think that they can live inside the same project, but they can certainly live inside the same solution. But don't quote me on the same project one. But I believe that you cannot have them in the same project, but you can definitely have them as part of the same solution.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Good to know. So Lastech asks, is FSX in the file extension just, I'm sorry, is FSX the file extension for FSharp? Is it just for FSI?
Yes. Yep.
Okay.
Yes. Yes. So you can. It is only for FSI, but I believe you're also able to, and I wouldn't really recommend it, but I think there's also a way that you can get it inside. So let's say that you had a project, an FSharp project. There's a way that you can get scripts loaded into your project and bring in some functionality from those scripts into like a standard, compiled sort of .NET style project. I wouldn't really recommend it, but technically it's doable.
Okay. Are FSharp libraries as mature as C# libraries?
Absolutely. And in fact, they actually build on top of it. All right. So you have things like if you're doing web development. So if you're doing, well, I'll speak from a web development standpoint. So if you're doing web development, you have things like, if you're doing WebAssembly, you have Bolero, which is built significantly on top of Blazor. It's just the F# way of doing Blazor, right? So you can think of F# libraries not as their own thing, but they build on top of whatever is already there. A lot of the web development libraries, they build on top of ASP.NET Core, right? And what they provide is just an F# way of doing things. So like you kind of saw here, maybe the syntax is a little bit different. So, for folks who prefer that sort of F# syntax, right? These libraries for web development or even other types of applications, they're kind of like wrappers and on top of like the already existing stuff, right? The already existing components within the .NET ecosystems. So yeah, they perform just as well. Again, because it's literally the same thing. It's just wrapping it and doing it the F# way.
Okay. We have a lot of questions coming in, so I'm going to keep it rolling just for a few more minutes before we get on to the next.
Yeah. Let's do it.
So why would someone use F# instead of Hackshell? And for those of you who don't know, can you explain what Hackshell is?
That is a good. Was it hacks? How do you?
Hackshell. Sorry, my apologies.
SKELL.
Hackshell.
Haskell.
I don't know how to say.
Okay, I'm gonna because
Haskell.
oh, there you go.
Yeah.
Okay, why would somebody use that? Sorry, no, because I know that there's another there. I know that there's another one by that name, so I want to make sure that I get the right one.
Haskell.
Okay, yeah, because I know that there's another not programming language, but like there's this other tool that's kind of by the same name. But anyway, so if we're referring to Haskell, I would say the reason why you would want to use it is the practical aspect of it, right? FSharp is super practical, um, in the sense that it lets you get things done. Like Haskell can sometimes be difficult for folks to pick up because it is a purely functional language. And as a purely functional language, there's certain abstractions that make it difficult for folks to understand. And it's a really great language. I'm not saying it's a bad language. It's just if you're looking to build a web application, for example, there's a few things in Haskell that you don't necessarily need to know or use, right? The other thing, so F# makes it really it's very pragmatic in that standpoint where it's like it's not you can work using functional like patterns quite effectively in F#, but it's not it's not strict about them, or it doesn't force you to use them. It's like you can use them in your app, but you don't have to. And at the end of the day, just use whatever's going to help you be productive. And part of that helping you be productive, not only is from the language standpoint, but also from having access to the entire .NET ecosystem, right? So which has tons of tools that help you be productive and again build line of business applications or things that like I said, you don't need those pure functional concepts to bleed into your standard line of business applications. You just need to build a form, or you just need to build a landing page, and you don't need to know a lot of those more complex or advanced concepts in order to get that done. So that's why I would say you would want to consider F#.
Okay. And that's over Haskell, like Pascal or Rascal.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, I like this username. So Audacious Ferris says, what is the most popular framework for REST APIs for F#?
ASP.NET Core. Yeah, I would say there's a few, and it's a matter of preference. So I wouldn't couldn't quite tell you which one's the most popular, because like I said, there is actually quite a few out there, and
There's
but
a
at
lot.
the right, yeah, exactly. So you have choice in terms of how you want to go about building your applications. But at the end of the day, sort of facetiously said, like ASP.NET Core is at the end of the day, they're all built on top of ASP.NET Core. So it's a matter of like what pattern. It's almost like when you're doing web development with web frameworks. Like, do I like React or do I like Vue.js? Which one's the best? Or Angular, right? Like they're all building on top of building on JavaScript, right? It's just a matter of which one feels better for you, which one has the tools or the features that make sense to you. So in that standpoint, it's like it's a matter of preference. There's quite a few of them. They're all excellent. And at the end of the day, they're built on ASP.NET Core. So, it's at the end of the day, it's just a matter of what feels natural to you.
Okay, excellent. So there are lots to choose from, and whatever works for you. Okay, we'll take a few more questions just for the next couple of minutes.
Yeah.
Thingy1118 asks, does it have non-script files like .fs along with package management?
Absolutely. Which was actually part of this next these templates here, right? The screen is not on, but essentially, yeah. So this next step, if you keep going through this module, you're going to see that this kind of shows you how to create F# applications. And I don't want to detract too much from from answering questions here, but you can use that .NET New command, right, and tell it I want to build a console app. You actually have a lot of different types of templates, web apps, all sorts of apps that are supported in F#. And in it, you have these FS. So as opposed to FSX, they're FS files, and if FSproj file, which basically contains build information. So what packages am I going to be referencing in my application? What other projects do I need to work with this application and things like that. So yes, And this is actually the way that you would probably want to build your applications, while scripts are actually a really great way of prototyping and getting started. And you can actually even build applications using scripts, right? This is probably the recommended way of doing it, using these templates and actually having the applications built, packaged, published, and deployed to wherever it is that you want to deploy these applications to. So yes, there is. The way that you would get started is with this .NET new command that the .NET CLI provides you with, and this would actually be the recommended way of building your applications.
Okay. Excellent. Is Ionide Tooltips hover functionality available in FSX, or is that only for full projects?
No, I think it's also available in it's also available for FSX. Let me just confirm that, but yeah. So if I hover over this, yep, there it is. So that tooltip functionality is there as well for FSX.
Awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Underground Pianist asks, does FSharp have the concept of observables like reactive extensions?
Ooh, that's a really good question. I actually don't know the answer to that. I would imagine maybe not natively, but I'm sure that there's some library. I know that C# has a few libraries that provide that set of functionality. I would assume FSharp kind of works the same way, where you would maybe use some sort of library, but don't take my word for it. I'm not quite sure about that one. But that's a really good question.
Okay. Alrighty, so we'll take that one with the slide. So I'll take one more question here before we get going, and so it seems like we can do almost everything with FSharp: ML, web, database, mobile. What are the best use cases?
Ooh, that's a really good one. Yeah, I mean, to be honest, because you can build anything with FSharp, it's really there's no, I think for the longest time, FSharp sort of, again, because it tended to be associated with like, oh, it's this functional language, so you need to know math, and it's great for math and data science and data processing applications. For the longest time, it was associated with that, and it's, while it is true, that's not really the case, right? Like, as you can literally build with all of these different libraries that are available out there. You can build web applications, machine learning. So there's no use case where it shines, and that's not because it's not. And mainly that's because it's really good at doing all those things, right? So it's first of all, it's multi-paradigm. So as I mentioned, you can do functional, you can do object programming. So you pick your flavor, what's going to help you solve your problem. And then from an application deployment, from what type of devices are you targeting, you can target all types of devices, whether that's web, mobile, desktop, whatever it is that you want to develop, right? It all does it really well. And actually, if you're looking at the sort of the web scenario, right, to draw some parallels, or scenarios where Sharp is actually really good. So in FSharp, there's this, when you're building web applications, there's this, if folks are familiar with Elm for developing web applications, there's this pattern for building interactivity into your applications called MVU, Model View Update, right? So that actually appeared in FSharp quite some time ago, and it was inspired by Elm. And if folks are familiar with Maui, that's kind of some of the patterns that Maui is starting to take, this MVU style approach to building interactivity into your applications. So in a lot of cases, FSharp even innovates, right? In with these concepts, it experiments with these concepts, and eventually you start seeing them become a little bit more mainstream. Same thing you're seeing in C# with records and all types of data. So TLDR, it's really good at everything. There's no one use case that you might want to use FSharp for. Just whatever it is that you do want to build, chances are you could probably build it with FSharp. Oh, I think you're on mute.
Classic. I said FSharp seems like the way to go. I'm more and more convinced the more you keep explaining. So with that, let's actually move to our second workshop of the event, second and final.
Let's do it.
You can find you can find all of the resources for this event and more at aka.ms/let's FSharp resources _ there we go. It's like, which one is it? So many AKAs. So this is where you can find the resources for FSharp for this event. There's also video links, blogs, documentation, um, and even more workshops if you'd like to continue your learning. So we'll get started here with Write Your First FSharp Programs. Now, Chris Noring actually just published these as well, so these are brand new and very excited to be sharing them with you all. So
Yeah, totally. Chris has just been on fire lately and just pumping these out. Yeah, I want to be like him when I grow up.
Likewise.
Let's see here. Okay, cool. So in this one, what we're going to be going over, so right now it was basically just setting up your environment and making sure that you can literally, write the hello world of FSharp and many programming languages, which is just printing something out to the console. But now we actually want to start working with data and assigning things. So previously there was that sort of question of like, oh, is this arrow function versus the equal sign? How do I assign things? So this module is kind of going to help explain some of those things here. And some of the things that we're going to be going over are things how you declare and use. And I'll do a little pause because words are hard here. So declare and use variables to store values. So as we'll get through this, we're going to talk about this concept of how data is treated in FSharp, which is immutable by default, meaning that your data doesn't change throughout the execution of the program. Now you can apply transformations to your data, but your data itself doesn't change. So we're going to take a look at that, and that's where those equal signs and arrow signs may come in handy. So I'll talk about that. And specifically the word variables, right? When you think of a variable, it implies that it varies or it changes. But in FSharp, because it's immutable by default, there's nothing that really varies because your data doesn't change. So it can be a little bit of a misnomer, but in most programming languages, that a variable is typically how this thing that you assign and store values in is called. So I just want to kind of make that distinction, and you'll see what I mean as we go through this. So we're going to learn how to use variables, store values. We're going to output them to the screen. We're going to read input from the console, and we're going to do some casting and conversion between types. So with that, let's take a look at that. And look at that. Prerequisites, run commands in the console, and you got to have .NET Core install or the .NET SDK.
Which we just did.
We just did. Yep. So we're ready to get started with this.
All right, let's get started.
Let's do it. Let's see. So again, if it's not clear to you what FSharp is yet, you know that it's this really great language for building these types of applications, right? And you need to be able to work with data inside of these applications. So let's take a look at how we can do that. So again, I'll call that out again. So using variables to store values, and typically you want to assign, some sort of value. And you want to name it. And the reason why you want to do that is you want to provide context to your data, right? Let me just pull up FSI here real quickly. So I'll do values.fsx. And again, in this case, I'm using FSX mainly because, again, it lets me prototype. I don't want to have to scaffold an entire application to show you these examples.
Oh, really quick, Luis.
Yeah.
Just to try and minimize keyboard clicks if possible, maybe we can copy paste when available.
Yeah, absolutely.
Amazing. Thank you so much.
Yep. So let's see. I'm trying to find a really good one here. All right, let's do this. Let's copy and paste this wherever my window was. All right, so let's say that we're working with values by themselves. So in this case, I have 65. Okay. So 65, it's a number. But what is 65? Is that like somebody's age? Is that how fast somebody's driving? Is that how much I got paid today? Like, what does 65 mean? And values by themselves, without any context, it's difficult to understand what is meant by them. Okay. So by assigning them a name, all right, you provide a little bit of context. So in this example, you have Chris here, and Chris is assigned to or bound to this name, to name, right? And the way that you bind values or that you assign a value to a name is by using this let keyword, right? So you're going to see let throughout all this this entire module here. But that's really probably one of the most important keywords that you're going to be seeing throughout FSharp, which is this let keyword. And again, it's used to bind values, and values can be a whole bunch of things, right? So they can be things like numbers, they can be strings, they can be Boolean, so true or false. They can be functions, right? So all these, a lot of concepts in FSharp, or a lot of constructs in FSharp typically return or are represented by values. And again, using let keyword, you can bind them, and by applying this equal keyword, that's how you can assign to them. Now, in this case, we assigned the value name to Chris, right? So if we go ahead and, sorry, for whatever reason, it's not, yeah. So if we go ahead and paste this here, all right, so we say Chris. Now, if I wanted to change the value of name, right, there's this thing known as the assignment operator here, which is this less than and dash, or I guess left facing arrow. And that's how you assign things typically in FSharp. If you've worked in R before, this actually might look very similar. That's kind of how you assign values to names or change values in R works. But let's say that, okay, now the name is not going to be Chris. Now the name is going to be Louise. And actually, you're going to see that it's going to throw an error here. So I tried changing the value of name to Louise. And you're going to see it throws an error here. And it tells me this value is not mutable. So what does mutable mean? Mutable means that it can change. And data in FSharp is immutable by default. And as I sort of explained earlier, what that means is that your data can be transformed. You can apply transformations to your data, but you can't directly change values, right, throughout the execution of your application, or at least change the value of something that's already been bound to or been assigned to. Okay, so it's telling me consider using the mutable keyword. So immutable by default doesn't mean that you can't mutate values, but you just have to work a little bit extra harder, and you have to actually, and by working a little bit extra harder, you have to be a little bit more conscious and ask yourself, do I really need this value to be mutable? Do I really need to assign new values to this particular to this particular name? So you need to be a little bit more mindful of that. Now, again, if I want to make it mutable, the way that I would do that is exactly how it's explained here. Right, so go here. Now, if I add the mutable keyword, now I'm able to make assignments to this name value here. So name, you can see it's Chris. And if I use this assignment operator, you're going to see that now the name is Louise. Right? So perfect. So that's how you go about assigning values and binding values to a name. And again, the reason you want to do that is because you want to provide context as to what exactly does this value represent. And again, because data is immutable by default, you need to be extra explicit with the mutable keyword in those scenarios where you want to have mutable data, or data that you can change throughout the execution of your program. There's this other thing, which is type inference, that I kind of alluded to earlier in the introduction. But what exactly does that mean? So this is another really cool thing that IonizedSharp provides you. So you're going to notice that there's these type annotations here. And I actually didn't have to type those. That's actually the tooling working for me. And in this case, it's telling me that the value of name is of type string, right? So it's text. But how does it know? Well, it's because of type inference. So with type inference, the compiler analyzes what type is the value, and based on that, it knows, right, what the data type is that you're working with. So in this example here, right, I didn't have to explicitly tell it. Notice how when I do the tooltip here, it's telling me, hey, this value name, it's a string, but I didn't have to tell it that. And that's because the compiler helped determine that by analyzing my code and saying, oh, you have a piece of text here, you have a string, therefore name must be a string. So you can see now how how you can write succinct code in FSharp, because now I'm not writing that boilerplate code that I would otherwise have to write in typically statically typed languages, where I'm actually going about it and actually telling it what the data type it is that I'm working with. It just sort of it infers or it guesses or it makes its best guess as to what it is, right? So cuts down on the amount of code that I had to write, which is always a win. Okay, so you can see here from this example, right? So if you were to do a number, you have integers. If you were to do a float, it will tell you flow and so on and so forth. However, there's going to be times where maybe the compiler is not going to have enough information. So in those cases, what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to annotate your data. And the way that you go about doing so is by doing something like colon followed by the type. So in this case, it's going to be a string. Okay. And often it's good practice to wrap it inside of parentheses. Okay. You can see that in that case, it kind of goes away, that sort of type information here, the type inferencing. But that's because I have basically explicitly defined the type in here, right? So that's how you're able to provide type annotations for your values. Okay. All right, so let's keep going here. So now that you know how that type inference helps you write less code because the compiler is actually analyzing the code for you, and it's automatically determining what types you're working with, as well as how you can go ahead and annotate your data so that you can be a little bit more explicit of the types that you're working with. Let's take a look at what's next here. So printing to the screen, there's actually different ways that you can print to the screen. So earlier you saw me print out hello world. And in that case, I just basically printed out, I just provided a string. However, there's ways that you can format data that make it really, really readable and can really get you just exactly what you want to print actual values inside of your data, not just static text, but actual values that you're using inside of your application. So in this example here, I have this value, name is Luis and company is Microsoft, and I want to print out to the console that information. I want to have some sort of label here saying name and then actually print out the value name. And I want to have another label for company and print out the value of the company, right? So if I were to go ahead and do that and bring that into FSI here, paste those in there. Right? And again, you see that's type inference at work there. If I were to highlight this text and run it there, you would see that it prints it out here, right? Name, Luis, company, Microsoft, just like I formatted it here. Now, the way that this is being formatted is using this concept known as string interpolation, which is, as you can see here, it's prefixed by this $sign, and then you write the text that you want to write. And if you want to print out any expressions or values, right, you can go ahead and add those inside of these curly braces. And eventually the text that you get here, right, it's sort of formatted. The values themselves are inserted, and then the actual results are sort of printed out here to the console. Right. I mean, you can even do other stuff. And again, what I say by expressions is, let's say that you want to do name plus company here. If I were to do that, you'll see that this is an expression which should sort of concatenate both name and company. If I run that here, you're going to see that expression of concatenating these ran inside of these curly braces. So it's not just individual values. You can actually have expressions. Now, may not be very readable, but it's doable. Right? Okay. So how else can we do formatting, right? So with this, there's that expression that I sort of talked about, right? So you have, in this case, a first number and a second number, and you're just adding both of those and printing them out. So you can certainly perform expressions as well. Now, one of the things that I'll call out is that there is no type checking here with string interpolation, right? So there's no enforcement. I can literally have a number and a string together, and it would work. I can have all types of things, and with string interpolation, all it's going to do is it's going to take basically like the string representation of whatever it is that I'm giving it, and it's going to print it out to the console. It's not going to check is this valid, like, you know, are you passing in the right values, things like that. It's not going to do any of that. If you want a little bit of stricter checking of if you want a little bit stricter checking, you can use these specifiers. So these specifiers, there's actually quite a few. They're almost like these C-like, if you're familiar with the C family of languages and formatting in C style languages. They're very similar, right? So it's typically this percent and then some sort of identifier or specifier as to what type of data are you working with. So in this case, the value name is a string, right? So Chris, it's a string. And then to enforce that it's a string, we're going to add this %s to it. And then we're also going to provide the actual value that is sort of belongs to this placeholder that I want to print out. So if we go ahead and copy this and bring it back to FSI here, you can see that it's a string. And if I were to run this, all right, that works nicely. So there's it's printf. So printf just literally prints it out without a new line character. Printfn prints it out to the console. So let's do that to make it a little bit clearer. And now you can see that there's that text there. So what do I mean by having like the compiler check the types? Let's say that Chris was not a string and it was actually a number. Okay, when I do that, you can see that it's gonna, if I run this, it's gonna run. But then if I try to print a string, notice how it complains and it tells me, hey, you told me that I was supposed to have a string, but it's actually an integer. It's a number. I can't print this out for you. So we might use something like %i, which is for integers. And then you see that it's actually happy there and it prints out what I would expect it to. Let's see here. Go back. Okay. So here's a short list of what these specifiers look like. Again, %s is used for strings, d and I is for either decimal point, decimal integers, or integers themselves. If you want booleans, there's %b, and you can actually check out the documentation because there's actually a longer list of these identifiers. So let's actually use this to store data. Now in this case, we're actually going ahead and using this .NET new console application. So let's go ahead and create a new application here. So we're going to go in here. Let me actually quit. So remember that's #Q, semicolon, and quit here to bring us back. That's not bring us back, but that is. Bring us back to the console here. And that's not what I wanted to print. I wanted to print this here. The console, so let's go ahead and copy that. Let's come back here and let's paste that. So basically what I'm doing here is I'm telling it, create a new console application with FSharp and output it to a directory called variables. So let's go ahead and do that. Now what's going to happen at this point is console application will be scaffolded for me again inside of that variables directory. And after a while, you should see that there's those files that I kind of alluded to earlier. There's that program.fs, which is the entry point for my application, right? And then this fsproj file, which contains some information. It's basically telling it it used .NET 5. Here's sort of the file that I'm going to be compiling, the program.fs file. And you can have additional build information as part of this, right? But in this case, let's not worry too much about it. Let's just go to the program.fs file here. And inside of it, I want to do some stuff. So we're going to go to the main method, and we're going to basically build some sort of calculator here. We're going to assign the value 0 to this sum name, and then we're going to just print it out to the console. Okay, so let's go ahead and add that to our main function here. And let's replace this with that. Something really cool as well as if you do something like Control-Shift-P, or I guess Command-Shift-P on a Mac, and then you tell it format document. It should automatically format it for me because the formatting is a little bit off here. There you go. And that looks a little bit nicer. Okay. Now, if we were to run that, the way that we run applications with the .NET CLI is with this .NET run command. Okay. And we're going to do that. And we're doing it, by the way, actually, I forgot one of the commands here, which is I want to actually go into this variables directory because when you're running an application, it needs to be from inside of the directory where your application lives. Okay, so we're going to go to cd to change directories, move into the variables directory here. And now I can actually use that .NET run command. Okay, so let's go here. .NET run. There we go. Okay, so .NET run. Now, after a while, what you should see is the output from here, which should be welcome to the calculator program. And then it's going to say the sum is, in this case, it's 0 because we haven't really done anything to it. A second here. Not sure why it's taking a while to run. Don't say values. Oh, there it is. Whoops. So that took a while. But basically just going to print out welcome to the calculator program, and then the sum is 0. And we're using that specifier, right? Because this is an integer, we're using %i. Okay, cool. I'm happy with that. So let's see here. Let's go ahead and try to build an application where we actually have an error here. So let's go ahead and create one called .NET new console application errors. So I would do exactly the same thing that I did before. Let me just move up one level higher, right, with CD, and then dot basically moves a level higher. Then I go and I say .NET new console language errors. So again, if you remember this new command is going to scaffold a new console application. That's an FSharp application, and it's going to be output to a directory called errors. So for that, it's going to go ahead and scaffold our application. Let's take a look at what we're going to be doing here. Basically, we're going to have a number. So typically, it's going to be very similar to that calculator program that we just wrote, except the difference is that now, notice how we're using the %s specifier, and that I don't think that that's right. So we're going to see how we can go about getting the compiler to be happy. So now this errors application has sort of scaffolded for me. I would go ahead and do basically what we did before, where we're going to copy this here, right? Replace our main entry point. Oops. That's muscle memory right there. I literally just launched the .NET FSI. So anyway, all right. So at this point, we should get the compiler complaining. Maybe go back here. At this point, there's going to be the compiler's going to complain because when I go ahead and try to run this, right, now I'm going to cd into the errors project directory. Let me move this a little bit, make it easy to read. I say .NET run. You're going to see that it's going to complain, and it's going to give that same error that we saw earlier, right? When we try to use something other than the specified type here. That might take a bit to run as well. But while that's happening, let's take a look at what else we need to do in our application. So we should expect to see an error like this, which we saw earlier, where it's expecting a string, but it's actually an integer. So the way that we would fix that is, again, by using the right specifier there, which in this case is the %i. And there it is. There's that error, right? So if we were to change this here to make the compiler happy, Again, we should see that at this point, the application should run successfully, and then we should actually, here is a number, and the number 0 should print out to the console. So that exercise there, we saw two things in that exercise. One was, how can we use, number one, we saw how to create an application in FSharp using the .NET CLI and the .NET New command to scaffold the console application. We also saw how you can assign values to a name, bind those values, and then you can print them out to the console, right? We also saw how you can correct errors, right? And using these specifiers, you can certainly take advantage of the compiler to guide you into writing better code, or writing, not better, but correct code. Okay, so let's go back to this exercise here. In this case, we're going to be applying operators. And in order to do that, remember how we had it was a calculator program, but it was literally just printing out 0 to the console. Now we want to make it a little bit more dynamic. We actually want to handle input from the user. And the way that we do that is with this console.readline. So if you are familiar with C#, this will look very similar. And in fact, it is because it's using the same sort of, it's using the same base class library, which you get with the .NET SDK, to perform this reading operations from inputs that are typed into the console, right? So that's how you would read data. Now, whenever you read data from the console, excuse me, whenever you read data from the console, it's brought in as a string, which means that you need to convert it into some sort of number if you want to perform operations. Like, again, if it's a number and you want to perform a sum, right? You need to, sums work on numbers, they don't necessarily work on strings. So you're going to need to be able to convert between those numbers. And the way that you do that is actually there's two ways, or two main ways to do it. One is to use this built-in sort of method here as part of the system base class library. Again, those base set of libraries that the .NET SDK provides you with. And you can tell it to parse, in this case, parse to an integer, right? But you can also use some of the built-in functions that FSharp provides you. In this case, it's int, which effectively does the same thing as this parse command here. So you can see in this example, if you were to have the number 32, and you were to use that system parse version on first, using the specifier, it should output the number 32, right? Likewise, working with int, it works the same way. So which one should you use? Within FSharp, you probably might want to go with this int. Not only is it less code to write, but it's more of like the FSharp recommended way of doing it, right? So just use this int. If for no other reason, the fact that you're just writing less code. Now there's all types of operators in FSharp. There's summation, subtraction, division, modulo, right, which gives you the remainder, not performing a not check, and performing validation. So making sure that two items are equal. So in this example, let's say that the number 10, if you were to divide it by 2 to see if it's divisible by 2, it should equal to 0. So you're saying, is 10% 2, is the remainder of 10 divided by 2 equal to 0? And if so, it means that it's divisible by 2. Right. So here you're using that modulo operator. You're using the modulo operator, and you're using this comparison operator. So yeah, let's actually see that in practice, both reading input from the console as well as how you can work with operators in FSharp. So here's the start of our application, or what it used to look like. But now let's go ahead and replace that code with this other code here, which what it's going to do is it's going to take a number from the console. It's going to take a second number, and then it's going to just print that out to the console. So let's go ahead and copy that, and let's go here and replace not our errors, but our variables fs file. And let's go ahead and paste that right in there. So again, in this case, I'm just going to type a number. It's going to read from the console. I'm going to type in a second number. It's going to read from the console, and it's going to print both of them out. So if I were to, let me go back to my variables. Okay. And I were to do .NET run, you should see that it's going to prompt me for a number, which I'll type in here. And then it's going to prompt me for a second number, which I'll type as well. And it's going to, oh. Run. Okay. So what happened there was I actually hadn't saved it. So it had the old code. So by doing .NET Run, it rebuilds my project automatically. You could, of course, do this manually yourself. You can do .NET Build to build your application, which will compile the latest sort of version of your application. But if you do .NET Run, it sort of does it implicitly. So in here, it's telling me type my first number. Let's do 2. My second number, 1. And first is 2, and second is 1. And then that's right. Those were the numbers that I typed in. Okay, cool. So now we know how to take input from the console. All right, so what else might we want to do with that? Let's see. Now we might want to perform some calculations. Okay, so actually, I think I replaced a wrong value here. So let's go here with the sum. All right, so we have the sum 0. And then what we want to do is we want to get the sum of the first and the second number. So before it was 0, we actually want to replace that. We don't want to print out 0. And notice how we're using that int function to cast or convert the string values from the first number that I typed and the second number that I typed. Converting those to to integers from strings, and then summing those together to get the sum. Okay. And actually, I think I may have this code here. Okay. So basically, what this is going to do is it's going to take the sum of both of those numbers and then print it out to the console. So if I were to hit run again, make sure that I saved it. It's going to take the latest version of my code, and it's still going to ask me for the input for those 2 numbers. But now it's actually going to do something useful with them, which is actually just summing them, right? So we're going to give that a second. And while that's going, let's maybe take a look at this here. Let's see here. Yep. So once we basically do this, in this case, let's do 2 and 1. Effectively the same thing. It should print out 3. So let's take a look if that's true. There we go. Type in the first number, 1. Second number, 2. Right. First number is 1. Second number is 2, and the sum is 3. So we've successfully read input from the console. We used operators like the summation operator, and we printed stuff out to the console and formatted it correctly by using these specifiers here. Okay, so let's take a look at what else is there. Oh, there's a knowledge check. Okie doke. Are you ready to check your knowledge, Jamie? Test.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can hear
you. Okay. Okay.
All right. So,
are we ready?
I think we're ready. I think so.
Okay.
All right, so let's see. The question number 1 here is, and you can actually follow along. Feel free to chime in the chat as well. How would you declare a variable? So a variable which has an integer and you want to be able to change it. So remember, data is immutable by default in FSharp. So if you wanted to be able to change it, how would you go about doing that? We have 3 options here.
Yeah, you need to change the mutable data or allow that to happen.
Yes. So that's definitely exactly. So that's.
See if you can get me. This is a good question. See if you can get the answer faster than me in the chat. I want to say. I want to say A.
A. Okay. All right.
But your question makes me think not.
Let's try. I mean, you're totally right. It is. So you want to be able to change it. You want to mutate it, right? So
would I have to say let mutable number 1?
You probably would. But what about this other mute? I mean, we talked about how FSharp is succinct. So why would I want to type out the whole word?
Okay, so I say C.
You want to say C?
Because
okay.
I do want to.
I don't want to influence you here. I'm just saying, like, there's all these things that you got to take into account, right? But okay, so you want to go with C? Okay, yeah. Cool. We'll see. All right, we'll try that one. All right, okay. So question number 2. what formatter would you use to format an integer? And remember, by formatter, there's actually two different ways. Remember how there was that string interpolation, right, which was that little $sign here. Or you have the specifiers where you specify individual types. Now, in this case, we're working with an integer. So how would we go about formatting an integer to print out to the console?
You would need the percentage and then I for integer for the formatter.
Yeah, I like that. I'm feeling good about that one.
Yeah.
Okay. And then last but not least, what is the correct operator for equality? Is it 1 equals? Is it 2 equals? Or is it this thing, diamond? I call it the diamond operator.
Diamond.
Yes.
Diamond operator. I'm going to go with the equal sign. So a correct operator is to use equal.
Okay. All right. You know, I wish it was like JavaScript and you did like 3 equals because that means that you're extra sure that it is equal. But okay. All right. Let's go with this.
Triple sure it's equals. Let's see.
All right. Let's see. Okay. So 3, this is going to be this one for the first question. So the last, third option, this third option as well for this one, and the first option for you. Okay. So check your answers. All right. So we're correct for number 3. We are correct for number 2 and number 1. Oh, okay. Almost.
Dang it. It is, you have to use the whole word mutable.
You do have to use a word. So yes, F# is
you were tricking me.
I did. It was a bit of a trick question. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
And yeah, the folks in the chat, I hope that you folks in the chat. Yeah.
Congratulations to everybody who completed your second F# Learn module and got all of these answers correct.
Yes.
You beat me to it. So amazing. That was awesome. We do have a few questions, and I do want to get to a few of them before they cut us off the live stream.
Yes.
So, yep, all of the resources for this event can be found in this, aka F# resources link for this event and more. So a couple of the questions that we have. Are there going to be any new F# goodies available in .NET 6?
That's a really good question. So there's one that I could think of, and it should be available soon in a preview, which is task expressions. So remember how I showed you way back in the very first module, a whole hour ago, that there was this way of working with asynchronous expressions. So async expressions are sort of F#'s way of writing asynchronous code. But if you're familiar with .NET, C# specifically, and I think VB too, the way that you write async code is with these things known as tasks, right? Now, you can interoperate between async and task currently in F#, but it's not sort of, I don't say it's not built in, but like there's some work that, like there's no task expression basically. Just like there's an async expression, there's no task expression. There is through external libraries, but built into the sort of the F#, there wasn't until I believe last week or something like that. The PR was merged to provide that task support. So that you should be seeing that relatively, I think, in the near future. And the task support will be sort of built in, and you'll be able to use task just like you would async. So that's one that I could think of right off the top of my head. But I'm not quite sure. I'm sure that there might be other things, but that's one that specifically stands out. I know that that's actually been years in the making. So. Oh,
cool, great. So the task manager, but there's more to come in .NET 6. So stay tuned for November. So Skolnick asks, how can we get an F# interactive terminal in Visual Studio with colors?
So there is. And I want to make sure that I try to answer that correctly. So they're actually FSharp Interactive. You actually can use it inside of Visual Studio. That was right. It was Visual Studio, right? That they said not Visual Studio.
Yes, Visual Studio, yeah.
Okay, so you can use FSharp Interactive inside of Visual Studio. In terms of colors, that's a good question. I'm not sure if maybe there's a request for like a user voice or something like that out there, or I'm not sure if the team is actually that's something that they're working on. But if they're, that's not something that's in the works, I would highly recommend that you reach out to the team and sort of make it known, make your voice heard.
Yeah, feedback, push a PR.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So FSharp looks very similar to Python. How is the performance of FSharp overall in comparison?
Excellent. It's really good. Again, because it's built on top of the .NET runtime, there's a few, like I said, that concurrency and parallelism sort of built in. It performs really well. And in fact, there was actually, I saw that there was a post that was written by a community member who was actually doing solving machine learning problems. And basically they wrote the Python equivalent in FSharp. And not only was it shorter in terms of lines of code, but it actually, I think when it came to loading data, I think it performed like about 10 times faster, or loaded data 10 times faster. So, and again, that's one instance, but, across the board, it performs really well.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah. What dependency manager do you use for your more advanced FSharp projects?
Personally, I use NuGet, but there are actually a few. There's also Packet that you can use. And if you go to the NuGet website, there's actually a way, I think, you have different tabs in NuGet for, basically copying and pasting that and getting those packages added to your project. Basically, Packet is one of those. So personally, I use NuGet, but you also have Packet as an option.
Okay, excellent. Well, I do want to be cautious of time because they are going to cut us off in like 30 seconds. But thank you so much, Luis, for all of this. This was amazing. Thank you for getting us started in FSharp. Thank you, everybody who joined us on the call. Thank you to our moderators and everybody who participated in the chat. We appreciate you taking your time to spend it with us here today to learn about FSharp. And join us next month, August 27th. I believe, for our next Let's Learn.NET Razor and Razor Pages event. Same time, and we can't wait to see you there. Thanks.
Awesome. Thanks so much.
Bye.
Bye.